Peace and love, y'all. It's your brother A.D.V.I.S.S, and we're here with another episode of What's the Word Wednesday, Season 2, Episode 35. Now, as we usually do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in the topics for today and post them in the comments, as well as we're going to put our logo for the show in the background. But as I'm doing that, y'all let me know how y'all doing, how y'all feeling, and what's the word. So much going on, so got a few things to talk about. But with that, shout out to those that are watching this, and for those who'll be watching this later on, whether on Instagram or YouTube. If you're on YouTube, follow your boy, subscribe to your boy at A.D.V.I.S.S Speaks, and don't forget to like, comment, share, and also hit that notification bell for more videos to come from your boy and more content to be revealed. So, with that, let me go ahead and I'm going to share with you the topics for today, and then we're going to do the show song and get into the show. So, for today's topics, as we usually do first, going to be looking into current events. So some news reports that have caught my eye, my ear, and my attention that I want to bring to speak about so that we can figure out and learn what's going on. Second, we're going to be getting into unconscious bias, which it also has another code name, which is called implicit bias. And lastly, we're going to get into addressing your contradictions. So, a lot of mental and behavioral things to be spoken about for today. But with that, y'all, we'll let a few more people come in, and I'm going to continue to let the track play in the back. And then we're going to get into the show song and get these current events popping off after the show song. So again, when y'all come in, let me know how y'all doing, how y'all feeling, and what's the word down in the comments, even if y'all right here doing it. And later on, I'm talking to you. Yes, I'm talking to you. Put down how you feeling in the comments. Give me a word. What's the word? How you doing? And then y'all let me know how it sounds as well. If I crack on this, is it loud enough? And just let me know. Alright, that's perfect. Oh no, no, oh no, no. And there we go. Alright, with that, y'all, let's go ahead. Let's do the show song, and then let's get into these current events. If you know the show song, you can sing along with me. If not, just go ahead, listen, and you'll figure it out. Since the show is What's the Word, people walk around still trying to get heard, and they asking the question. So we gotta know. Yo, we gotta know. What's the word, y'all? What's the word? What's the word, y'all? What's the word? What's the word, y'all? What's the word? Tell them like, what's the word? What's the word? What you heard? We gotta know, yeah, what's the word? Peace and love, y'all. It's your brother A.D.V.I.S.S, and we are back in here again with another episode of What's the Word Wednesdays. This is season 2, episode 35. Now, have the comments. Of course, in the comments I have the show topics. But again, y'all coming in, let me know how y'all doing, how y'all feeling, and what's the word, as well as shouts out to those who are watching this now and will be watching this later. I say all of that before. You'll even hear a spill at the end. But with most of that being said, let's go ahead. Let's talk about the topics, and then we're going to get into current events. So for today, we're going to be getting into the topics, of course, of looking into current events. as well as we're going to talk about unconscious bias, which another name or word for it is implicit bias. And lastly, we're going to speak about addressing your contradictions. Y'all got that? Perfect. And with that, y'all, let's go ahead and let's jump into these current events. Now, right now, the few articles I have current event wise is speaking on still some health things within the pandemic, as well as a court hearing, and then also what's going on with natural resources. But with that, y'all, let's go ahead and let's start with the first headline and article. So, first article we got is coming from MSN Health, and the headline reads, from the Today Show as well. Headline reads, cases of flu rising amongst children or kids, young adults, according to CDC. So one more time. Cases of flu rising among kids, young adults, according to CDC. Now, again, when we usually read it, it's 2 paragraphs and we're out. If you want to find the article, I will re-say where it's from, etc., etc. Now, article title and this headline reads, but you get what I mean. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued a health advisory Wednesday that cases of influenza have been rising amongst young adults in recent weeks. And shouts out to the brother Buffet Destroy in the building, man. How you doing? How you feeling? And what's the word, my G? What's the word? Let's continue. While flu cases are still low nationally, more than 90% are among children and young adults ages 5 to 25, according to the CDC. Most cases are the H3N3 lineage. A strain health experts say is particularly troublesome as it tends to mutate faster than other variants of influenza. The last time H3N2 was the dominant strand was in the 2017-2018 flu season, when the United States saw 710,000 flu-related hospitalizations and 52,000 flu-related deaths, the worst seen since 2009 H1N1 flu pandemic. Now, for those who don't even know about, that there is actually different types of flus that come out, and they've had different names. There's a reason why they call it a seasonal flu, and they push and recommend folks to go and get a flu shot every flu season, because of the fact that there's always multiple different strands that come up and pop up and change because of its mutating nature. But that's what happens when you apply medicine in modern ways of addressing viruses, that they tend to learn those body to body. But yeah, let's continue and we'll be done. The CDC has been investigating a flu breakout at the University of Michigan, where hundreds of students have been tested positive for the flu. Flu breakouts have been reported at other college campuses in the past month. So we got the flu traveling around right now, along with still being in the pandemic with the virus, coronavirus. And it's very interesting to know what's the differences between the two, because in the beginning of the pandemic, they said that they mimicked each other so closely because they're both respiratory, having to mess with, breathing and that sort, that it was hard to tell whether if you had the flu or you had COVID. But now people have their experiences, so they're able to tell you. But ultimately, just wanted to throw that out there to y'all. So again, this article is under MSN Health, specifically from Today News, and the headline reads, cases of flu rising among kids, young adults, according to the CDC. But with that, y'all, as well, if y'all have any articles, if y'all have any news that y'all would like to share and it will be important for folks to know, please throw them in the comments. You are encouraged to do so, and I appreciate you sharing what's going on. Shoot, what's the word? Now, on to the next one. Now, this article comes from Benzinga, but again, under MSN is where I'm getting a lot of this stuff. And the headline reads, Pfizer post Vopinorsin data from mid-stage cardiovascular disease trial. So I'm looking at some stuff that what Pfizer's got going on besides just the vaccine. So let's see what else they got into it. Again, 2 paragraphs and we're out. All these interesting names, I gotta say. So it's the whole thing here, and this is more so talking about, folks, if y'all getting into the stock market again, but let me go ahead. Article reads, Pfizer has provided an update on the phase 2b study of the Vopinorsin investigational antisense therapy for cardiovascular risk reduction in severe hypertriglycemia Modernia, so much of a long name. In the dose-ranging study in subjects with elevated non-HDL-C and triglycerides, TG, the study met its primary endpoint, achieving a statistically significant reduction in non-HDL-C at all doses tested for 24 weeks compared to a placebo. So right now they are working on a type of therapy to help with cardiovascular risk reduction. So it has to do with your heart, y'all, since that's, to my knowledge, is the leading killer of people in the US is cardiovascular disease. So it looks like some data is coming out that the therapy that they're having is working, or at least have shown to drop the risk. So I wanted to share that with y'all because, again, we got the whole situation with them also just focusing in on just the vaccine. But again, there's other things that these businesses and these pharmaceuticals also get into besides that. But with that, y'all, that's been that second article. Y'all continue to have some stuff. Throw them in the comments. Now, on to the next one. And this one has to do with the current president. And this comes again. This is from Redders. I get it from MSN. And the headline reads, Polyp removed during Biden's colonoscopy is benign. White House physician. Benign basically means that it is not life-threatening, as well as it does not have a significant effect. But with that, y'all, 2 paragraphs and we're out. Article reads, Washington, Redders. A polyp removed during President Joe Biden's colonoscopy last week is a benign, slow-growing, but thought to be precancerous lesion, for which no more action is required at this time, the White House physician said in a letter released on Wednesday, which is today. The polyp was identified as a tubular adenoma, if I'm saying that right, which is similar to one Biden had removed in 2008. Dr. Kevin O'Connor said in the letter, which is dated Tuesday. He said routine surveillance is recommended that Biden should have another colonoscopy in 7 to 10 years. Biden briefly transferred power to Vice President Kamala Harris on Friday as he underwent the procedure, making her the first woman to hold the presidential reins in the U.S. In addition to the colonoscopy, Biden had a physical exam as well, and it said that the president was healthy and vigorous and fit for duty. Biden, 79, is the oldest person to take office as U.S. president, leading to high interest in his health and well-being. Actually, that article is short, so I read the whole thing, y'all. But few things from the article. The polyp that was found was benign. He was able to get rid of it, so it's not life-threatening. Kamala Harris was president for a few hours, or however elongated it was. And she's the first woman president, and all the other titles you can throw on top of it. And that the president is said to be in good, healthy, and vigorous shape. So, with him being the oldest president in history to take the office. But with that, y'all, that's this article. Again, comes from Redders. Headline reads, polyp removed during Biden's colonoscopy is benign, White House physician. On to the next one, y'all. Now, this one was the one I was talking about when it comes to energy, but more so fossil fuels. And this article comes from CNN, and headline reads, China is joining the U.S. and other countries in tapping emergency oil reserves. It's very interesting. Tapping into the emergency oil reserves. Again, 2 paragraphs, and we are out. Article reads, China confirmed on Wednesday that it will be joining the United States and other major energy-consuming nations in releasing strategic oil reserves to try to cool high prices and tame inflation. If y'all haven't noticed, wherever you are, I'm in California, gas prices are horrendous. It is extremely high from the norm. Right now, the cheapest around near my house is about almost $4.40 per gallon. So just imagine wherever y'all else is like probably $6. I can imagine how much it is in Hawaii. But with that, let's see, let's continue. The White House announced Tuesday that the United States would release about 50 million barrels from its strategic petroleum reserve, and that China, Japan, India, South Korea, and United Kingdom will participate in the coordinated move. So a multitude of these places are looking to get in on this coordinated move for oil. And we'll see what ends up happening. I'm going to read one more line and then we're out. According to the International Energy Agency, which monitors global oil supplies on behalf of the world's leading economies, there has been 3 coordinated stock releases since the agency was founded. Before the Gulf War in 91, after Hurricane Katrina and Rita damaged oil factories in the Gulf of Mexico in 2005, and in response to supply disruption caused by war in Libya in 2011. So, to quell the inflation and the gas prices rising, they are tapping into reserves of gas to help bring down gas in that particular case. Because if not, you'll continue to see these gas prices rise and rise because of the short supply. That's the game we have, supply and demand. Scarcity is a thing. But with that, John, that is this article. Again, comes from CNN, and the headline reads, China is joining the U.S. and other countries in tapping emergency oil reserves. Now, last article I got for y'all, because it's a lot of news, but I didn't really look into so much because there's some things I repeated. But this last article I want to speak about is a court case that recently had happened. And it's not the Kyle one that was already done. We spoke about that one last Wednesday. But this one having to do with Ahmaud Arbery. And then this comes from CNN. And the headline reads, guilty verdicts in the trial of Ahmaud Arbery's killers met with relief and joy in Georgia and beyond. Again, two paragraphs. I said three. 2 paragraphs and we're out. Article reads, a jury Wednesday found 3 white men charged in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old black man, guilty on multiple murder counts as well as other charges. The verdict delivered by 9 white women, 2 white men, and 1 black man came after more than 11 hours of deliberation spanning 2 days. It followed 8 days of testimony involving 23 witnesses. Arbery's parents appeared alongside civil rights stalwarts outside the courthouse following the verdict. They praised the prosecution and supporters who joined the family in their fight for justice for their son, whose killing drew national outrage and helped cast a spotlight on other racially driven crimes across the country. Now, again, there's a lot more in this article. I'm not going to go through all of it, especially who were the 3 men were charged, their particular names and all that. Again, you can go and find this on CNN with the headline reading, guilty verdict in the trial of Ahmaud Arbery's killers met with relief and joy in Georgia and beyond. Now, y'all put y'all's, feelings and y'all's responses to this. I will lightly state this. The verdict is what has been made. I'm glad for the family. I'm glad for the attention that is given. But at the same time, this continues to show you, to shed light on how the courts and the justice system runs, as well as how one-sided the system is when it comes to individuals, depending on your race. And it's undeniable at this point. So this was just another fine example of now really addressing that particular issue and getting those called verdicts. Now, that's what I have for it. Grateful. But at the same time, always remind yourselves too that just because this is one victory here for a family and many more over, there's still a longer fight that we have to continue to get ourselves into. So, congratulations, but then at the same time, let's ponder, let's really assess and look at what you've gotten from this trial and what you've learned from it. And shouts out to the brother Sincerely Notes the Truth in the building. How you doing, brother? How you feeling? What's the word, my G? I'm just wrapping up now, and this was the last one for the articles for current events. If y'all have anything more, please throw them in the comments before I do move on. And if not, we will transition into the next topic. But not just yet. Let's see. Doing good, bro. Just chilling before work. I feel that. And you putting in that work, man. Day in and day out. There's a lot going on. But I'm glad to hear it. I'm really glad, man. Now, with that, y'all, we're going to go ahead for the news. And we're going to move on to the next topic, which tonight's topic, second topic, we're going to talk about unconscious bias, which another word for unconscious bias is also implicit bias. Now, you're probably wondering to yourself, okay, what is unconscious bias? If some folks may know, others this may be a new idea to them. So before we even do that, I'm going to break down the words unconscious to you, give you a definition, and I'm going to give you one for bias. You may already know what bias is, but I want us to at least have groundwork. So again, I'm going to read these definitions, but in your mind, as I'm reading it, or even on your own, please put down in the comments, y'all, whether when you hear unconscious bias, what are the first few things that come to mind? Put them in the comments. Don't matter if you hear now or later. Put it down in the comments. When you hear the word unconscious bias, what comes to mind? So, while y'all doing that, I am going to read off a definition for unconscious. Again, I'm getting this from Webster's Dictionary. And unconscious is an adjective. First definition meaning have lost consciousness. Of course. Second half of that, not marked by conscious thought, sensation, or feeling. Another one, of or relating to the unconscious. What is the unconscious, you say? Not knowing or perceiving. You're not aware. And the second, or the last one, not consciously held or deliberately planned or carried out. So now that's unconscious. Now when it comes to bias, here are a few definitions. First one being an inclination of temperament or outlook. So a temperament having to mean how you basically move with yourself. That's how I remember temperament. Is kind of how you are as a person. Second one, in an instance of such prejudice. So having to do with some type of prejudice. Again, bias. Another one, deviation of expected value of a statistical estimate from quantities it estimates. So bias, again, you can be biased not only in your thoughts, but also in statistics with numbers. So can numbers really tell the truth? Do they lie? Y'all let me know. Another one, and then we'll drop it from there. A tendency of a bull to swerve is a bias, which is interesting, having to do with that. But ultimately, y'all, it is to give a settled and often prejudged outlook to, is what a bias is. Now, putting those two together, you're like, okay, so then what does unconscious bias mean? AKA implicit bias. Now, what that means is referring to all the different forms of either discrimination, stereotyping, based either on race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, ability, age, and so forth. All of those different markers. And it's different from your own cognitive bias, because that is what we have. Of course, we have the conscious and the unconscious. This is something, again, you're not aware of. So, it's different patterns that you're not too sure of, that it actually is there and is happening. So when you think about unconscious bias, it is something that you haven't even brought to your attention. And for you to figure that out is to either come across a situation where that challenges that thought, or challenges, that bias you may already have about something or somebody. And then progresses on to show in your behaviors and your temperament. Now, what did I want to speak about specifically when it comes to unconscious bias? The question that I would have for that is, what does unconscious biases do for relationships with people? So how does unconscious biases affect relationships? I should phrase it that way. And y'all can answer that however you want to end up doing it. Now, to answer that question, from my perspective of how unconscious biases affect relationships, it basically rips apart the ability to connect and to relate to people that you are having a relationship with, whether if it's your family, whether if it's friends, extended family, the whole line, etc., etc. And when I mean by that, you may not end up agreeing on particular games, agreeing on politics, religion, all those other different stuff, as well as, agreeing on types of, I always bring it up, types of food. But it's to a point that you're not consciously aware of it. And the only way for you to find out about that is for someone outside of you to point it out to you. But when that happens, it creates an inner dialogue as well as inner turmoil and conflict to a point you think that person is attacking you, and it pops into, I guess, your defense mechanisms without really knowing that the purpose from the person telling you that is so that you can be aware of it. So ultimately, it ends up, again, breaking and disconnecting and ruining the relationship you may have with said family member, friend, and so forth. And because of that unconscious bias or implicit bias, another thing that it does is that it ultimately attracts you to different groups of people that may either agree with that same bias and continue to foster it, whether if it is good or bad, or lead you to feel isolated, alone, black sheep, a pariah within society. Because you have this unconscious bias, this implicit bias, and it doesn't fall in line with other people's own thoughts and their biases. So it gets into a whole different situation with which one is more right or wrong. And it starts to become an ethical dilemma as well too, depending on what the bias is. Maybe it's something as simple as, I think apples are better than oranges. But the thing is, unconsciously, before you even knew about that, you always would just grab an apple. And every time you see an orange, you just avoid. I used to have that actually with cantaloupe. I mean, now I know why I don't like cantaloupe. It's because of the fact that I did it. But beforehand, I just never wanted cantaloupe. I always liked melon better than cantaloupe. I mean, I still do. But it can get to even larger issues when it comes to race, religion, politics. And it becomes problematic because of those unconscious biases and not being aware of how detrimental they can be to a relationship and to people. That friction that it causes ultimately creates more division, but also it creates more division and begins to put people in groups that agree with each other, and it starts the echo chambers. So how unconscious bias has an impact or affects relationships can split, while at the same time really deletes the opportunity to have a conversation on these things, because again, it's something in you that you're not aware of, but then depending on how open you are talking about it or even addressing it and your defense mechanisms, it drives everybody away. Now let me see. All right, I do what you gotta do, man. Appreciate you coming through. Much love. Now, another question to ask then. Okay, then we'll get into it. What are the pros and cons then of having an unconscious bias? Which is very interesting to even ask a question of that particular caliber. Because when people think of unconscious biases, it already has, again, a negative meaning already. It's already seen as, oh, it's bad to have a bias. It's bad to have, especially something that's unconscious that you don't even know about. But that's life. You never know until you figure it out, go down the road, what you already just naturally just gravitate to. And whether if it's for your well-being or if it's harmful, you don't know until finally it comes to your awareness. Now, pros and cons of unconscious bias. We'll go with the pros on this, since again, there's a negative light that's on the word unconscious bias, or for folks, implicit bias. Now, a pro to an unconscious bias, one, it gives you an area of growth. Again, we like to talk about like our pros and cons, our deltas and our strengths and weaknesses. The pro to the unconscious bias is that it actually is an area for growth for you to explore. Now that might sound like it's confusing, but hear me out. Because of the fact that it's something that you're not aware of and you don't know that you already have this bias, as you are perfecting, or I should say even perfecting, as you are progressing and getting better as a person, individual, whether mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, all realms and spectrums, having this unconscious bias and growing, you come into awareness of it, whether if again it comes from somebody outside of you, or if it is a TV show, you read a book, and you finally noticed it. You have something to work towards, and you have something to give time and effort to get better with. So this is something to help you build your character. It's having an unconscious bias and addressing it, which later on we'll talk about something similar. Now, another pro to unconscious bias is, it's funny. Sometimes in the same sense of it, of you not knowing what it is, it also gets to the point of the whole idea about ignorance is bliss, is that since you're not aware of it, and especially if it is not harmful in any way, shape, or form, That is something that is a less worry and a less stressor for you. So there's something less to worry about, because we like to add so many things on our plates day to day, just to juggle, just to, learn about and figure things out, that it's hard to prioritize, because we're worried about, oh man, what about I got to pay this bill? Oh, what about me not working out? What about me having to get over not having food? What about me, etc., etc., etc.? And having an unconscious bias towards something, again, it could be a person, place, thing, whatever it is, and you not knowing about it since it's unconscious, that's one less thing you even have to worry about for right now. Especially, again, if it is not affecting you heavily, okay? And is not in a negative fashion. Now, another one, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I get these off the top of my head, but if y'all have any pros too for unconscious bias, please put them in there. I'm going to move over to the con of unconscious bias. Like I spoke about before, if it's detrimental, it can create divisions between relationships. It promotes, in a way, radicalism or extremism, depending on where it lies, again, on that spectrum, whatever it is, as well as an unconscious bias. What's going on, Kunde? Good to see you in here. How you doing? How you feeling? And what's the word? Same thing to the brother Smooth 007 in the building as well too. Smooth T, my bad, my G. But how you doing? What's the word, y'all? I'm getting into the cons of unconscious bias, aka implicit bias. Another con of an implicit or unconscious bias, besides the breaking of relationships and connections, is what I spoke about earlier too. It creates echo chambers. And in those echo chambers, what I just spoke about before, it can create groups, either extremists on either side. Either side. The turntables to see all sides. Shouts out to the booth. And what that does is it creates even more and more division, and more tribalism, more groups around wherever we are, whether if it's in media, whether if it's fashion, whether it is, again, education. We create all these different areas in these spectrums that if you're not in this particular group or, elite in this particular way, you're not welcome. So it also, unconscious bias, another con is that it prevents you from being open about certain situations. Because again, with folks who do have unconscious biases, I know I have some too. Now again, they're not aware of it, but when brought to the attention, if they're not open about it, they're not willing and ready to address it. Again, but at least that's what I have when it comes to the pros and cons, when it is addressing what an unconscious bias is. Again, a lot of this talk too, I've learned mostly from psychology, because of me going to school and learning what psychology is and getting my degree in that as well. But I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention because of the fact that this is something that happens on a daily basis. From reading from the article that spoke about earlier, with the whole trial with Ahmaud Arbery, and them basically shining a light on how unjust the justice system is. And what happens in those instances is because we have folks and people who have unconscious biases, and some of them also conscious biases, that don't address and go against what the justice system is supposed to do. Again, they have no clue. And because of that, many different trials in different court cases not only get thrown out, they're not investigated thoroughly or critically, and they're looked at lightheartedly because of other things that have been taught, and again, not have been consciously addressed or brought to their attention. So it has an impact on how the infrastructure of justice, business, and all other parts of the system that you live in, all the way down to the choices and the opportunities that you have as a person. So you have to work towards being aware, and at the same time being willing to know and learn about those unconscious biases. Because if you do not, you will further add fuel to the fire that is this situation in the system we live in. But before I continue, let's look into the comments real quick and see what we got. So boom, I think unconscious bias comes from the media manipulating social. Yes. So society as a whole. Also from narrative warfare. Yes. Oh, so good. We got accountability for once with the murder of Aubrey, although Rittenhouse was. Yeah. In that particular case, if I could touch on that real quickly too, with that, there was a lot of already evidence that was geared towards letting you know what the end result was going to end up being. There's so much information that could be shared there, as well as logically what was going on, how he addressed the situation, and what was, there, what was being done beforehand, and why would someone attack it. It's a whole thing, again, back and forth. I got to talk about a bit about this Sunday, but again, especially this is where unconscious biases can also come into play, or unconscious bias comes into play. Like I said beforehand, it has an effect on the decision making, whether, again, to help or to harm. Boom, let's see. Yes, I am halfway through Know My Name by Chanel Miller. It's so eye-opening regarding how horrendous the legal system is for victims. So much unconscious bias and overt bureaucracy too. Yes, I don't know the book, but thank you for sharing that. But at the same time, that's why it's important. That's why I wanted to bring up what an unconscious bias is. And for those who don't or ever heard of that, another word would be implicit bias, which is things that we hold in within ourselves that we are not even consciously aware of. Hence, unconscious, and bias being things that we kind of already have an idea, or we're already set to be like, nope, that one's better than that. So let's see. Yes, with the Rittenhouse trial, the prosecution totally botched it. It was almost feels like on purpose. Setups. Again, that's why honestly, law, politics, all of that, there's a reason why you have lawyers and you have people who can read the law and manipulate. And what I mean by manipulate, that means be able to find those loopholes within the law to justify actions. If y'all know what a law is, especially I think of in the natural sense, what natural laws are versus theories, is the law is something that is unchangeable. It cannot happen, it cannot be changed, formed, or rewritten into history. A law is set where it is and it happens. Law of gravity, air, all these different types of laws that are just set in stone. Now, a theory, a whole different story. And the laws that we do, they get updated and they get changed. They get amended multiple times just to, again, either if it's to self-serve a few and to mess over the rest, Or if put right, I didn't say put right, if rewritten to go back and fix what was previously quote unquote broken. But you got to be careful. Like I said, you have to be careful with the unconscious biases. There is positives to it, but again, taking the spin on what normally hear when you hear an unconscious bias or just bias in general, it is seen as a negative thing. Now let's see. Like the judge was going to call for a mistrial even if the jury convicted him. Again, they had it in their mind already. It messes with, like I said, decision making and what an ultimate outcome of something can happen. You can see one thing, hear one thing, feel another, and think another, and ultimately, boom, the result from somebody else, from seeing on the outside, was like, yo, that was clear cut straight. And then the other, they're dumbfounded because of the fact that this was a closed cut case, whatever. It shows you straight up here and they get off. I mean,
Hey, how are you?
what's going on, Kundin? What's the
What's
word?
up? What's the word?
I would
Yeah,
say
the
this.
Rittenhouse trial was such a circus, like I was following the trial for through most of it and was like, uh, even the judge was a joke.
Mm-hmm.
He, there was a Trump ringtone in the middle of the trial,
Mm-hmm.
which proved he was a Trump supporter. And then he wanted to call a mistrial because I think the prosecution brought in a video evidence that they had previously mutually agreed not to include in the trial.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the jury convicted him, the judge wanted to, call for mistrial anyways.
Yes.
And then the prosecution brought these two so-called forensic, experts on, computer technology and stuff,
Yes.
or video technology, and they were supposed to be experts, and they couldn't even explain pinch and zoom.
Hmm.
And the problem was the video evidence uh, was kind of blurry, so you needed to pinch and zoom to see it more clearly.
Yes.
And the experts that they brought on couldn't even explain the technology properly, even though they were supposed to be experts. And so I'm like, the prosecution totally botched the trial. Like, they did a really bad job.
Hmm.
It was almost like on purpose because, maybe they didn't even want to do a good job.
Coming in with that intention,
Yeah.
that was already
Like
the
failure
end
on
all.
purpose, fail on
Yes.
purpose.
Yes.
Like,
Another example, and this is for y'all too. Um, since we was talking trials, and I know this name can get you canceled, whatever. Whatever it may end up being mentioned is not anymore. But shout outs to the Boondocks for actually
mm,
addressing way back when
mm-hmm,
this whole idea of not only unconscious bias, but also just bias in general when they did a rendition of the R. Kelly trials back in the 2000s before. Not this current one that happened and was done, but back way when. And most of the people during that trial, they're giving all the evidence, showing the evidence, clear cut. This is what it is. This dude should be done sent. R. Kelly goes, just sings, says it's not this. You have Huey being on the opposite side of, nah, this dude need
mm,
to. His brother and everybody else being upset with his choice of why, because unconsciously, without them knowing, they see R. Kelly as this big figure and idol that can do no harm
mm-hmm,
and do no wrong.
mm,
So when these charges were against him, people could not believe, they could not fathom, and they could not come to grips of him doing that. And so he gets off, people singing happy, joyful, all of that. But what that ended up showing in that is not only did people not see obviously what was happening in front of them, some didn't even know why they was really for R. Kelly, besides, again, the unconscious bias of in their eyes couldn't do no harm without them even really knowing. And they ride with him. They
Mm-hmm.
love his music. So that's more than enough. But
Mm-hmm.
again, that can be detrimental and it could lead to other things problematic down the line. But I wanted to bring that example up
Mm-hmm.
because that was in the cartoon. That was in the
Mm.
Boondocks. I think that is the first season of the Boondocks that they
Oh,
talk about that. So
I haven't seen it. That's a cartoon.
mm-hmm.
It's an animation. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
But continuing, earlier then I was giving some thoughts on unconscious bias, and I also did some just some pros and cons just because. And
Mm.
then the earlier question that I had, and I want to ask you, is how does unconscious bias affect relationships?
Mm.
And I wanted to see your take on
Yeah.
that before I continued on.
Yeah, I think as far as the pro, I mean, there are very few pros in my opinion, but one of them might be like, uh, it's literally uh, how we function, how we live, right?
Mm,
Unconscious bias is part of unconscious programming or subconscious programming,
mm,
right? So a lot of the tasks, the daily tasks that we do are done on autopilot because the brain cannot afford energetically or resource wise to think through every single decision. Like,
mm,
like you have no idea how many brain cells and nerve firings are required even for us to talk right now, right?
mm,
Or even to wear our clothes, even walking and sitting, every little task requires so much uh, resources, right? So
yes.
therefore, some of it are just done on autopilot or automated, so you don't have to think through every single thing. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is done unconsciously via unconscious programming.
Yes.
So that will by default include bias. Like bias just in this within that context, it just means just uh, some assumptions you've learned
Mm-hmm.
over the years about some people, even just specific situations, so that you don't have to think through them. You just,
Yeah.
do the task automatically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but that pro can also simultaneously be a con when it becomes too much,
Yes.
where like and when it's also influenced by systemic oppression like racism, sexism, ableism, fat phobia, etc., then your biases are oppressive, leaning towards oppressive,
Mm.
while benefiting you in terms of like, yes, you don't have to make decisions anymore, resources, so you spare your own resources,
Yeah.
but the result might be that you kill somebody, right? If
Mm.
you're a white cop killing a black man or a black woman, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, it only benefits the person who has the bias. Ideally, it would be better if we can train our. So I feel like I'm on two sides on this, where yes, completely eliminate some biases,
Yes.
but maybe reprogram some biases so that it can become more co-creative or collaborative,
Mm.
where it can benefit both parties or all parties or as many parties as you can.
But wouldn't that also be creating a bias on top about some biases are not as good as any other ones?
Right, exactly. The second one is harder because it cannot be done on an individual level. As long as we have
Mm-hmm.
a completely oppressive system full of systemic oppression, the second one is harder to do, which, by the way, is why I'm against things like nonviolent communication, for example, right?
Mm.
Within an oppressive system, by which, by the way, is stolen from the semi-indigenous people of Malaysia.
Hmm.
And it works in that indigenous context because they knew each other, and not only knew each other, they knew each other for generations, for centuries, and it was mostly an equal relationship.
Hmm.
But when relationships are inherently not equal, what you're doing is you're causing emotional intimacy without consent when you're imposing this so-called nonviolent communication.
Mm. Mm. Hmm. Again, now that brings to me again another point of a lot of these unconscious biases, and I spoke on earlier. They have to do with a lot more behavioral.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because again,
Basically,
it does
I've said before
encompass.
that things that work on the interpersonal level may not always work when it's scaled up to the systemic level.
Mm-hmm.
Like even something as simple as don't take things personally. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
works if your spouse, doesn't put the toothpaste cap back on and you get mad about that. Or if your friend doesn't text you on the same day, that you text them,
Or
if they don't text you back, you know, on the personal level, right? It
mhm.
works. But
Or
if you scale it up to systemic racism, then it becomes oppressive. When you're telling people to shut up, basically.
hmm, or it almost sounds almost in line how you said it. Almost sounds like I know a better. There should be a better word for it, but pet peeves.
Pet peeves, yeah.
But those are something that you're conscious of. It could start off
Mm-hmm.
unconscious, but you start noticing things like that, and it's like, okay, something that throws me off.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings me to talk this point when it comes to unconscious bias. Um, is in your thoughts, in your opinion, perspective. Um, does unconscious bias or biases make you comfortable or uncomfortable?
Mm-hmm. That is a good, uh, what's the word, indicator or signal. Yeah, more like a signal. Whether it makes you comfortable or uncomfortable is a signal as to how useful it is and what it is influenced by, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a term called white fragility, right, which can also be used for other things like straight
Cognitive
fragility or male
dissonance.
male fragility, which, by the way, I don't like the term because it's actually not fragility, it's reverse victimhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they're pretending they're the victim and accusing you of being the bully, right?
Yeah.
Like when a cop says they're scared for their life after they killed the black man, right? That is reverse victimhood. And there's so many versions of it. I see it every day online
Mm.
where, even just yesterday I saw it, like somebody uh, did something racist and then called everybody calling her out a mob.
Mm.
And it's like, what the fuck? And so the discomfort is can be, right? The discomfort of being not just called out, but being of having your privilege taken away for just a second, for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And even that is very uncomfortable because that person just got a taste of what it's like for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine if that's uncomfortable for them, how much is uncomfortable for people actually living that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case, they should lean into the discomfort, being like, okay,
Yes.
this is a signal
Yes.
of my unconscious biases that are oppressive. This is a signal that I don't want to change because I would rather pretend I'm a victim and they're bullied rather than actually have to change,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're because I don't want to slay that dragon inside myself, right?
Exactly. And that's why earlier, and I reference again, for me on the pros, I ended up saying that it's a place for you to end up growing after you start really
Mm-hmm.
knowing about it. So, I mean, for me, having an unconscious bias on something, leaves more room for you to grow. Because again, that's what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing throughout life. Long time learner or lifelong learner, you're figuring these things out. But the way that you lean into it is where you either add to yourself or you subtract from yourself. And having that unconscious bias, like at least bringing this up, I know it gets deeper and it goes into so many loops. We take it so many different ways. But what it basically is getting at is the framework of how not only we function, like you said earlier, is an everyday thing, but also how
Mm-hmm.
we create systems that also function within society. And when we have
Mm-hmm.
this type of thinking and this type of setup, shouts out to the brother, 93 till Thriftfinity in the building. What's the word, brother? How's the word? Um, we began to create pariahs, which we create outcasts, we create
Mm-hmm.
um like you said, more different webs also of oppression that it may not seem like that to us, but undoubtedly it's present and it's there. And
Mm-hmm.
when we put ourselves in a position that we're so comfortable that it does not affect us, we cripple ourselves from being able to get a full view of what's really going on. So unconscious
Mm-hmm.
biases, again, I talked about earlier, ignorance is bliss. It basically takes off that lid and that eye from your peripheral, and honestly, this is all you end up seeing versus really being able to get a full view of what's going on around you and only just focusing what's straightforward
That's a
on
good
you.
point because that slit or that thing that you're saying here, the tunnel vision, it
Mm-hmm.
actually keeps you comfortable. So the discomfort
Mm-hmm.
is actually a really big sign telling you something really big that it's time to change.
Yes.
That's what the discomfort is.
Yes.
Because the bias is actually keeping you comfortable. It's there to keep you comfortable.
Yes. And that's why, and we already kind of talked, well, we already ended up saying really how do you, be able to know when you have unconscious bias. And we already said that was the
Mm-hmm.
sign, being
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable. Um, but sometimes, again, because I know there's different tests. There's like an implicit bias test that they have on
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if it's Harvard or if it's UCLA, but it's one of these
Mm-hmm.
universities that they have where people can take to figure out what their unconscious biases or implicit biases are, whether it comes to race, whether it comes to job education, how people are seen and perceived, gender as well. Um, and sometimes I know when I took it, the result from when I took it a while back in a program I was in was saying that I had more of a disposition of being comfortable around not even say it was like a highly favorable, but it was like the one on the lower end where there's neutral, then there's somewhat, then it was like moderately, and then it was highly. I was right there
Mm-hmm.
at the somewhat. I have a somewhat more disposition to be comfortable around white people. And then
Mm-hmm.
in my head, I was like, how? Because when I think back in my particular experiences, I'm like, I rarely was around any particular white people. So I was like, how? And then what that ended
Mm-hmm.
up doing in my head started making me think about, dang, so like, how much, you know, have an influence has that had on me when it comes to interacting? And then you get into the whole talks about code switching. And then you get back to, okay, where
Mm-hmm.
does that even really start to stem further back from? In my particular experience, it goes back further because of what history has taught us and shown us. So throughout history, I unconsciously was picking up, because what we've been seeing as slaves and not enslaved, and that's mostly was our history, that we were enslaved and brought here and all of this stuff, and had to learn to be subservient under the rules in colonialism, that unconsciously had an impact on how this test came out and said
Mm.
you're
That's what I
more
wanted to
susceptible.
say.
Mm-hmm.
That's like when you were saying all that, I was actually wondering who even made these tests because
Exactly.
academia as a whole has a
Exactly.
long history of upholding white supremacy and colonialism. So how can the colonizers talk about their own biases? They don't know it because they're inside it. Like only an outsider can tell their biases.
You don't always necessarily critique the test. You critique the person who created the test. That's why people's talking
Exactly.
about some at a point in time they were talking about getting rid of the SAT as well
Hmm.
as reassessing I know
Oh yeah, that has
the bell
racist bias
curve,
too.
all of that.
Like, hmm
So
even
that's where.
IQ is it comes from eugenics. The whole thing. SAT also comes from eugenics. Like,
So again, yo, that's why I wanted to address the unconscious bias because it is so pervasive. It is so deeply rooted in our everyday actions to a point that we don't even know. So again, it's almost like the choices they think that you really have at the end of the day come from somewhere else, and that somewhere else got an impact from somewhere else, and it doesn't necessarily say that it's either right or wrong, but it's that even that place that you got it from hasn't even questioned where they got it from. So it's a long line of literally at the end of the day, yes, we don't know what we're doing, but the way that we have things set up now, it only works for a few and it doesn't work for the many. And when it doesn't get to work for the many and it only works for the few, it creates more again of those divisions and it starts to make again we have our classes and when we create the structures, and once we create these structures, we keep them in play because of the fact that it works for this particular system. Because if it doesn't, if we continue to deconstruct it and decolonize the mind or all of these different aspects, things start to crumble. Babylon starts to fall.
hmm
And what ends up happening there is people are not ready to, again, move over because of the conformity into it, as well as they want to be comfortable. And for them, oh, I don't see it. It has nothing to do with me. So I'm good to go. I have no addressing of that, even though they have that, again, cognitive dissonance. So they have that other thought in their
hmm
mind that's like, no, this might be wrong. But then what I'm seeing is like, no, but I've been taught this, that they feel the uneasiness, but they decide, yeah, nah, I'm good.
hmm
And you get
Yeah.
the outlooks of what was going on right now.
hmm Yeah. In fact, cognitive dissonance is the technical term for what we've been talking about all this time. That discomfort from your unconscious bias being challenged,
Yes.
and then the default into the reverse victimhood once it's challenged.
Yes. So to leave out and to round up when it comes to unconscious bias. Um, last question I'm gonna pose to it, and we already a little bit spoke on it, but what steps can you take to bring out those unconscious biases? What steps can you take?
I think it takes, even before the steps, it takes a willingness to learn and grow and change and genuinely change. Like
Mm-hmm.
not not just change to be accepted or approved, not just change to look good,
Mm-hmm.
but to truly like create a new impact, to change your impact.
Mm-hmm.
And that a big one is being willing to give up your self-image.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people, especially in the United States, at least in my experience, I've noticed are just obsessed with self-image, especially white men and also white women, but even us black and brown and indigenous people, because we are colonized, our
Yeah.
minds are colonized by white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
This is the same programming. And I think the reason is because we are programmed with a good, evil, false binary. And so we're
Mm.
obsessed we're programmed, all of us really, I mean, especially white people, but all of us because we're under that programming,
Yes.
this desire, this obsession to keep up the self-image of being a good person,
Yeah.
right? That's why I made this
I
post on
know.
Sunday where I said, I'm
But
like,
let them know. Let them
I'm not
know.
a good I said, I'm not a good person and I don't even aim to be a good person.
Yeah.
Literally, no. Because who even defines goodness? It's often defined by the people with systemic power and privilege.
Yes.
And therefore, since the system is upside down, anyways, I would rather be evil within this system than be good because it's all upside down.
Yeah. Look at the
But
movies.
really, my goal is to be whole and to be real.
Yeah.
But I was just making a joke when I said that. I was like,
Yeah.
my real goal is just to be whole and to be real,
Yeah.
to embrace all of my opposites.
And there it is. And that's, I mean, I think that's honestly how we could describe at least being real is knowing your knowing
Hmm.
yourself holy, not holy in
Exactly.
itself being higher, but you knowing yourself and learning about all aspects of yourself does make you, or get you to a higher place. But at the end of the day, um it's also learning to live and address your contradictions, which
Right. Exactly.
moving
Because
to
like
the next topic
when you're
is that.
challenging the bias because of that obsession with the good evil false binary and keeping up that self image of being a good person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in as well. They start feeling like you're attacking the entirety of who they are. And it's like, no, this is literally a small part of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You have this bias, it is causing massive harm, but it doesn't define the entirety of who you are. And in any case, that is not even as important as the harm you're making. That's more important to stop that.
Yeah.
But they're more obsessed with keeping up their own image.
Yeah. But I mean, not to say with that, that's why
Mm.
it's important that we do this last thing, which is the last topic, and we can mix both of them still too all in here together
Addressing
because I
your
did it. The
contradictions.
last topic for tonight, which is addressing your contradictions. Now,
Mm.
before, because I have a lot, because coming from what we were even speaking on with unconscious bias, I have a lot of questions I want to throw at you and for us
Mm.
to discuss. First thing I'm gonna tell y'all again, and y'all can get annoyed at me at this. This could be because it's your unconscious bias. I'm just playing, but y'all get annoyed at me keep on saying this, but I make these topics and pair them together on purpose because they flow so well with each other as well as they play off of each
Mm.
other. So again, having an unconscious bias, you're also talking about having to also do with the contradictions. Now, with addressing
Mm.
your contradictions, first you got to know, okay, for folks, it's like, okay, what is a contradiction? Well, a contradiction, and I'm not going to look up the definition for this. We've heard this word used so many times. Contradiction, at
Mm.
least from my perspective, is doing something that's in contrast of what is actually supposed to be done. So if I need to go
Mm.
and get gas, but I still decide to keep driving and pass the gas station and then wonder why my car stopped, that was a whole contradictory act. It's like you
Mm.
needed gas. You know you needed gas, but you continue to drive. That's a whole
Mm.
contradiction in itself, as well as what another term
Mm.
people will use is also I call it a catch 22 because I keep on forgetting the other term that's used. But basically, there's things within society that it only can work for one side, but it doesn't work for the other side, and that's a contradiction in itself. Is when it comes to relationships, it's like, oh, okay, so men can sleep around, but and they're called something, as in players. But when women sleep around, that's a whole nother different story. They're seen as, hoes, continue all of those different names. I call that a catch
Mm.
22, but in a sense, it's also too, it's just a contradiction. It's like, okay, then if you can do that to do that, but why can't I also do this? I mean, the biggest thing that we experience every day, life in itself is a whole big old contradiction. You either trying to figure out, am I living to die or am I dying to live? Do I do this or do I do that? It's a whole conundrum in your head trying to figure out, okay, then what do I end up doing? And shouts out to my cousin, prolific hands in the building. He gonna give you those hands unless because gas is getting so high now. I don't know if you can drive wherever you at. But again, shouts out to you, brother. Yeah, gas is $6.
Yeah, a good
I talked about
example is
inflation.
there are the conservatives who claim to be pro-life, but they're also pro-death penalty, pro-war, anti-welfare for the child after it's born. So it's like they're not pro-life; they're just pro-birth or anti-abortion. It's they're using this word pro-life to just trick you
Mm-hmm.
into believing that they're actually pro-life. They're not even pro-life after the child is born because then they don't want any welfare or any support for the mom and the child to make sure the child actually grows up to be an adult.
Yes.
And then they're pro-death penalty on top of it, pro-war. Now, I do know one person, and I only know in my life I've only met one person like this, right? Where this person is pro-life, a vegan, and then when he was drafted for the Vietnam War, he went to court to fight against it on religious grounds, and he won. So I'm like, okay,
Mm.
at least this person tries to be consistent,
Yes.
you know.
But that's when you've been able to address your contradictions and be now consciously aware of your
Right,
biases and what you have. Um,
right, like,
but to get into it, more addressing your contradictions. First thing I want to ask, and then the other ones we're gonna start. It'll be more to really address is you know why why do we create contradictions for ourselves? Like, why do we do that? Like, I really want to know, why do we decide to do one thing but then do something else and then get upset or get sad or have some emotion that the way something turned out is not what we wanted it. Like, let
hmm
me know what you think about that, Kundin. Why do we create contradictions?
I think most people just want it easy. They don't want, again, it goes back to the discomfort, right? They don't want to
Hmm.
grow, and growth requires discomfort, right? They don't want to get out of their comfort zone. It is extremely uncomfortable to find out that you have these contradictions because, going back to unconscious bias, some of them, or maybe even many of them, are actually unconscious or subconscious. You might not even be aware that you have these contradictions inside
Yeah.
yourself. You might not even be consciously aware. And to find out that you have these creates that cognitive dissonance. It's extremely uncomfortable, and most
Yes.
people don't want that. They would rather stay comfortable.
Yes. You know what I also want to add to that?
Hmm.
On the flip side, another reason why people create contradictions is because they love to be entertained.
Yes.
They want to have a form, again, of escapism from having a
Hmm.
contradiction so that they can get away, again, from, like you said, addressing and looking in to those biases that they have and not willing to open up to it. And the same token, another reason is
Yeah, and
because
they're
they,
part of that escape is the self-image. They have that self-image is actually a fantasy, and they constantly escape into it.
yes,
It's not even real. It's not even who they actually are. It's a very comfortable fantasy to escape into that self-image.
as well as on top of that, it is a learned behavior.
Hmm.
They've learned to live in dysfunction. So the
Hmm.
only way for them to function is to be dysfunctional. So for them to be like, I do want to get something to eat, but yeah, I'm not going to eat right now, and then get upset that either it was their parent, either it was their loved one, whoever they're in a relationship with, didn't go get them food. But no, I just asked
Hmm.
you, and you said you didn't want anything.
Hmm.
I came back, and now you mad that I didn't bring you nothing. I don't know what you want. And I'm using these examples because of the fact that it's very relatable. It still happens to me a number of times. But again,
Mm.
a part of that is too is because we've been not only conditioned, but we have normalized dysfunction. And that helps, again, is another barrier to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to do what I do because of the fact that I know that it makes me feel nice. Again, going to the main points of this is knowing that either it keeps you comfortable or uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think another reason that I thought of is long-term change is harder than short-term gratification. Like a good example
Mm,
would be a contradiction between, let's say you have a long-term goal of completing a marathon, right? And to
mm,
complete those goals, you have set for yourself and daily exercise. Maybe you're gonna run daily. You have
yes.
a specific nutrition, like what you're gonna eat. Uh, but so that's your long-term, goal, this desire that you have. But meanwhile, you
Mm-hmm.
might have temporary cravings uh, that contradicted that you might give into. Like maybe some mornings you don't want to get up and run, or maybe sometimes you want to eat ice cream, even though you know
Yes.
that if you keep eating it, it might affect your your muscle growth or whatever, or your ability to to keep up, right?
Yes.
But you give in sometimes, and there is a threshold where at what point if you keep giving it, it takes over your long-term goal, right?
Mm,
Yeah.
so you got right to one of the other peaks is the your motivation, your desires
Hmm.
for things. Dang.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I agree. I agree. Any other ones?
Mm.
Any other ones that come to mind?
Contradictions.
Of as in why do we create contradictions?
Oh, why do we create contradictions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's easy, keeps us comfortable. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we don't we don't want to fight hard enough for long-term change, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is our real desire.
Yeah.
Temporary gratification or short-term gratification is easier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so far that's all I got. I thought about something, but it's in the back of my mind, so I'll probably come
Yeah.
back later. But there was something else. Yeah.
If it does, awesome. If not,
Yeah.
meant for another show. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing that I want to address, and I see it as a contradiction, but logically, it's a contradiction if you get what I mean. But because there's explanation behind it, but I want to see and hear your thoughts on this. Um, I just wanted to use an example that's
Oh,
known
yeah.
right now.
One thing I wanted to point out, I know we didn't look at the dictionary this time, but I do want to make a distinction between contradiction and opposites. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so when I wrote my poem, which I've read before, I think the breaking up with the demonization, exotic perfection, false binary, I listed out a whole series of opposites
Yeah.
that I go through, right? At times where I said, I know sometimes I feel like I'm strong, sometimes I feel weak, sometimes I feel like I'm beautiful, and sometimes I feel insecure. Those might seem like contradictions, but they're more like uh, temporary, like emotional landscapes that I write that
Yes.
are opposites,
Yeah.
and it's important to embrace all of these opposites as who I am. Like I don't necessarily see them as contradictions. Like contradiction is more like something is opposing you, actually more not opposing, negating the first thing completely, annihilating it completely to the point that the other thing doesn't even make sense anymore. Like the examples we gave, right,
Yeah.
with pro-life and pro-death penalty, or running the marathon, or just sleeping instead of exercising that
Mm-hmm.
day. So like if you just keep sleeping all day instead of exercising, it will eventually completely negate your long-term goal, and that's when it becomes all contradictions. So it's like is more like a scale, right? At some point, that
Hmm.
contradiction will completely negate the other. That's when it becomes a contradiction.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for clarifying that. I know for myself it's like I already knew that was the difference between the two, because honestly opposites, whenever I think about stuff, it's just letting people know the other ends of the spectrum of whatever something is,
Mm-hmm.
of knowing, okay, what is
Mm-hmm.
night, what is day, what is up, what is down. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, up is not a contradiction to down, it's just letting you know the positioning. So a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
opposites is really just giving you a frame of reference, versus a
Mm-hmm.
contradiction is more so I see. Honestly, if I see it this way, opposites are those frame of references, and the contradiction is the behavior and the actions that go with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you're being
Yeah.
contradictory, it's because it's within your behavior and your actions. But when you're doing
Mm-hmm.
or learning or doing something on the opposite, that means, oh shoot, today, you know, actually you got up at this time at
Mm-hmm.
nighttime versus now you got up at daytime. That's not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
meaning it's a contradiction. That's just you got up on the opposite, time of reference of the days. So to me, I see the opposites as frame of references and the contradictions as the behavior and the actions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now, my point I wanted to
Yeah.
get to you and ask you about, and I said, to me, logically, it can make sense, but then at the same time, to me, I also like to use the word conundrum, but it's a contradiction still to me too. Is um this aspect of CRT? And I know
Mm-hmm.
people who I know from my schools will
Or
probably get on
critical
me, be
race
like, "What you
theory for
talking
people who
about?"
don't know.
Yeah. For
Right.
people who don't know, it stands for critical race theory, intentionality, well,
Mm-hmm.
all of that together, intersectionality. Um, but the reason
Mm-hmm.
why I wanted to bring it up is because there's been so much news about it, even more recent, of officials
Too much.
addressing critical race theory and
Yeah.
saying that in itself, critical race theory is also racist. So I want to speak on that,
Yeah.
and I want to get your thoughts on the contradiction of what critical race theory does, but ultimately what it can also be seen as, even though it's trying to
Mm-hmm.
critique something, but it can also be seen as being racist.
Yeah, I mean, the alt-right is really trying to turn it into the modern day Red Scare or modern day McCarthyism, basically, because they were trying to tie it with communism. In fact, I don't know if you saw the news clip recently of the woman who is Asian, but she grew up in the Soviet Union, and she's the new nominee, Biden's new nominee for the office of, I believe, budget control.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, the Republican senator or representative, I think his name's, I forgot his name, but he literally asked her point blank, like, uh, have you resigned from the Youth Communist Party of Soviet Union, of a country that no longer exists? And she was like,
Yeah.
you don't resign, you just grow in that country, you just, grow out of it once you stop being a youth, like.
Mm,
But it's like literally like doing exactly what Joseph McCarthy did, asking, "Are you a communist?" Basically.
yes. Oh man. But the reason why I wanted to bring it up is, from me being in a program that strictly talked about critical race theory and intersectionality, being on the outside of folks who didn't necessarily understand or understand it, I see again the point to it, but
Mm-hmm.
I can see the ultimate damage that can be done from it. And
Mm-hmm.
people are like, okay, what are you talking about? Well, in this particular case, how they're seeing it as CRT being racist. Technically, if you want to get technical, it speaks about a particular group that's
Who
oppressing
were oppressed?
a
Yeah.
whole group of groups. So it typically
Mm-hmm.
is speaking about that. So if you want to be, you know, straight to the point and like literal, CRT critical, it is. But at the same time, You gotta look at the context. You gotta see why.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we like to see surface
Mm-hmm.
level. We like to only address, okay, what is, the microwave straight saying that's already about it. Oh, it's this. Without
Mm-hmm.
going and digging further to why it's coming across that way. And what ends up happening
Mm-hmm.
too is when you have a perspective, there's multiple different perspectives. But what happens is when you have folks get stuck on just one perspective, again, we create these separate groups. We create the extremists. We create those who don't care, who's against it. We have those who want to do this and those who don't want to do that. To a point, its main intention, which is just to address something, becomes a political statement. It becomes something that now you are a part of some type of terrorist or some type of organization that's against these type of people or against this type of thinking and type of thought. Versus the first letter in the acronym, which is critical, talking about thinking critically. You're just
Exactly.
looking at it, you're addressing it. That doesn't necessarily mean you're just focusing, okay, it's all your fault. So everything in, about critical race theory is just putting all the blame of what's happened and things and stuff that's done onto just white people and folks who have enslaved and done all of this. No, it's critically looking at, okay, why does history still retell these stories? Because again, another
Mm-hmm.
contradiction within critical race theory for folks who argue against critical race theory is, well, okay, if that's the case that we're addressing and we're talking about what has been done to quote unquote BIPOC, people, now you got to address the reason why did you even start off doing that in the first place? Why did ancestors come through and did what they did to people like me, like yourself, to create a type of system that they created? Are we pulling full blame on you? Some people will. Other people is just like, I want answers. And because of the fact that CRT is addressing that to make that the elephant in the room brought to your attention, and you decide to put up a wall of defense and just say, no, I'm not going to address that because it's racist. Yeah, you have a point. But at the same time, it's literally asking you like, yo, why? And if you don't know why,
Mm-hmm.
can you show in history where it's not that this is not true? Can you say it's not valid? And that's what
Mm-hmm.
happens. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why you see what you're seeing with it now. So for me, it's a contradiction
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that even though the intention of CRT can be to address, and first, of course, the first C, to critically think about why this is a perspective, we skip across the C and we decide to go straight to the R, which is race. And that's all that we're just focused on. It's just, oh, it's about
Mm-hmm.
race. It's all about this. It's all about that. And again, you have the whole thing. We like, again, like you said, tunnel vision. We like to just look and focus on one thing. We have selective, not only hearing, but selective thinking and selective just picking of stuff. We don't want to look at the whole, because if we look at the whole, we start to notice, oh, dang, that actually has some valid points that I have to address.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have no answers for that. And then again, we get the fear,
Mm-hmm.
we get all the other emotions and other things that add to it, and it shows, guess what? You're human. You ain't gonna know everything. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have answers to everything. It's okay to say I don't know. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to take
Yeah.
accountability of what has happened. And they're not
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, all white people or all people who have done anything bad or harm black, all different types of races, it's your fault all completely. No, it's just, this is something that happened in history. Just know that this was a part of history. Don't hide it and put it under a rug. And when you can just say, all right, I get it. I may not have agreed on this part, but I agree on this, and we can move forward with that. You'll
Mm-hmm.
understand that is just a place for you to grow. All these perspectives has helped you
Mm-hmm.
grow. You don't keep one on all day, every day. Like, oh, I got on my critical race
Mm-hmm.
theory lenses all day. I got on my humanitarian lenses all day. I got on my anti um life and all this stuff lenses all day. No, it's honestly, I did a whole speaking of that, selfish plug. I made a whole song based off of all of the tenets within critical race theory, and I called the song
Mm-hmm.
CRT lenses. And how I
Mm-hmm.
had it is, you have your backpack. You can say your proverbial backpack, which I call lenses, because it's your multiple perspectives that you carry around with you every day. And depending upon the situation, you grab into your bag, you put on them glasses, put on them lenses, and you view the situation or you view the problem and the challenge, and you see, okay, does it make sense through this lens? Okay, if it doesn't, pop in another one. That's why
Mm-hmm.
being open is important, and being able to know when something does not work helps you to address the contradictions. So
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, for me, when I saw it, and I get your point on it too, that's why for me, CRT's perspective, which can go for a lot of other stuff, is a contradiction in itself, because the way that it is taught and it comes across to people misses the point completely for folks.
Yeah. It's only a contradiction depending on the lens that you look at. So I have three counterpoints to some of those accusations. But before I even do that, I wanted to also point out, like, isn't it in the first place, isn't CRT limited to uh, undergrad and grad? I'm not even undergrad, just grad courses, right?
It's grad courses,
It's just
and
grad.
it's not in
Yeah, it's
every.
not even taught
Yeah.
in colleges, not in high
Mm-hmm.
school, not in elementary school. So I wanted to point that out in the first place because it's so blown out of proportion. There's,
Yes.
the fear mongering by the alt right, because in the first place, it's so limited to, how many people can even afford to go to grad school, right? It's just a
Exactly.
tiny percentage
Privilege.
of the population. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's class privilege, race privilege, all of that. So, so first, let's say that's, I want to point that out. But as far as the counterpoints, like when people say why this particular point of view, right? Why focus on
Mm-hmm.
this particular group of people or whatever? That's because history is hidden from us, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like, uh, in the United States, like how many until that HBO movie came out, uh, Lovecraft
Dear white
Country. How
people.
many people?
Oh, okay.
No, Lovecraft Country. How many people even knew about
Oh
Black Wall
yeah.
Street and the Oklahoma bomb? I mean, the bombing of
Yep.
Black Wall Street. Almost nobody knew, right? And likewise, like many people know about the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atomic bomb, the big one, right? But how
Yep.
many people know about the 2 million bombs that the United States government dropped on Laos, right?
Yes.
Making
Yep.
it the most bombed country in the history of the world.
Yep.
I grew up in the neighboring country, Burma or Myanmar today, and I didn't know about it, right?
Hmm.
So history is deliberately hidden from us. And so to me, it seems one-sided only because the other side not only hid history, in some cases rewrote it completely, right? To
Yes.
this day, like um, Thomas Jefferson's slaves that he raped is called a romantic relationship, right?
Hmm.
A slave cannot give consent, so it was rape.
Hmm.
Uh, and by the way, the another argument that they gave, this is like a side note, I've seen white people give arguments like, oh, Africans owned slaves too, they sold each other to the white people, but they completely ignore that there's a difference between forced labor and chattel slavery, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where forced labor is temporary, you're just forcing somebody to do something for free against their will, but you're not treating them like property. You don't say you own them. Chattel
Mm-hmm.
slavery, on the other hand, is specifically very much, to the scale that they did for 13 generations and 400 years or 500 years. That
Yes.
unprecedented scale was specifically done by European colonizers through their transatlantic slave trade in the United States and
Yeah.
Canada. Uh, and by the way, at the same time they were doing it to Africans, the Romanians were doing it to the Romana, Romani people also for
Arabs, all
500 years.
it's slave trading was going on
Yeah,
all over the place of the globe.
right. But those were also similar parallel Europeans, in this case, doing it against brown people, right?
Hmm.
Brown indigenous people. And I believe it was also chattel slavery. So it's a different kind and a different scale. Like
Yes.
nobody else did it for 13 generations.
Yes.
Which means when I say that, I'm emphasizing this because not only did they treat the initial slaves they captured as property,
Hmm.
they they treated the children that were born from it as property, and the
Hmm.
children that were born from that, and then over and over again. Not only did they do that, they forced them to rape each other in what they call sex farms,
Hmm.
where even the white women were raping their black men, the African men, as well. They were like
Disclaimer
pushing stuff into
YouTube,
them.
disclaimer
Yeah,
Instagram, okay?
yeah.
All disclaimers, okay?
So they were
Don't get
doing the
on me
most
about this.
horrendous things. Yeah, they were like, and then they would force the African men to rape the white six black women at a time. You know, that level of cruelty and scale had never been done before, like for that much and for that long, over and
Yeah.
over again. So I
Yeah.
want to emphasize that. Because even to this day, they say, "Oh, what about black on black crime? Like, crime is crime.
Hmm.
Like, there's no such thing as, you know, black on black or white on white. Uh,
Yeah.
and they
Those
don't address,
statements,
the
yes.
racial inequities, like racial inequities that create black on black crime, right? Um, anyway, so I wanted to address that, but the
Hmm.
second point, calling CRT racist is just carrying on the same legacy of what I call reverse victimhood, that they've been doing
Yeah.
it for 5 centuries and actually 1,000 years in in my case, India and Hindus, because they
Mm.
colonized India for a lot longer. I
Yeah.
think 800 years at least. Uh, so it's reverse victimhood because they keep doing it to this day, right? Like a cop will kill a black man or woman and say he was scared for his life, right?
Hmm.
Or call it self-defense. So that's on the smaller scale. On the bigger
Yeah.
scale, the British criminalized 10 million Kali worshipping tribes in India,
Hmm.
called them thugs, which by the way is the
Yeah. Yeah.
same thing that they call black people, right? They
Words
call them
can
thugs.
also create that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Similar to calling the Native Americans savages, right?
Yep.
So the same type of uh, apparatus, the same MO. They
Yep.
called them thugs, and then they genocided, they killed all 10 million of them, including newborn babies, right?
Hmm.
So it is, I call it this reverse victimhood, when you are calling something that's ironically addressing their racism and
Yeah.
calling that racism is reverse victimhood, because they do that even on a personal one-on-one level. Every time you call them out on their racism, they will call you racist for calling them out on their racism. It's
Hmm.
such a childish thing too, if you think about it. It's so infantile. It's like saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not no you are. I'm not no you are. I'm not no you are." That's what
Yeah.
it is. That's the mentality of that. You know,
Yes.
is reverse victimhood over and over again, systematized and systemic. And the third
Yes.
point is they invented race. Just like they
Yep.
invented caste in India, they invented race, and therefore they invented racism. So some people say, in CRT, they say black people cannot be racist because they don't have the systemic power and the privilege. Because there's a difference
Hmm.
between prejudice, xenophobia, and racism,
Yeah.
because racism is prejudice plus power. But I want to go even further than that. I want to say only white people can be racist because they invented it. They
Yeah.
invented race and racism that came from it. It's completely made up. Like ethnicity is
Hmm.
real, but race is made up. And that's why I don't like people who say, oh, there's only one race, the human race. No, there is no such thing as race, and therefore there is no race. It's more accurate to say there's no human race at all. There's only one human species, right? So
Words.
yeah, again, they're doing the spells with the words. They're doing curses really, using words and playing with words, right? Because most people don't go that deep. They think racism is the same as xenophobia. No. And that's why they use the "I have a black friend" excuse, right?
Yeah.
When you accuse them of racism. But that just means you're not xenophobic.
Yeah.
Xenophobia is you're not willing to be with anybody at all except your own race or your own ethnicity. That's
Mm-hmm.
xenophobia. You just don't want to do with anybody. But
Yeah.
racism is a racist can be both xenophobic or not xenophobic. There's a distinction. A racist can be okay, I'm not xenophobic, I'm willing to let you in my space, but I might still slap you. That's a racist. I might still slap you just because you're black or brown or indigenous.
Yes.
Or I might still kill you in the worst case, right?
Mm-hmm. All of that. All of
Or
that.
touch your hair without your permission and be like, all these microaggressions, touch your hair and be like, oh, your hair is so exotic, can I touch it?
Mm-hmm.
That's also racism. Like, yeah, they're not xenophobic, they're willing to let you be in their space, but they're gonna treat you like shit.
Again, y'all, that's why I wanted to bring this up because honestly, just as Kunin broke it down, I mean, race is it's a social construct. You know, again, I can say shout outs to
Hmm.
CRT, but innately,
Yeah, is
innately we know this. Innately, we really know these
ironically
things
with
of
real
stuff
impact,
like
right?
that, and
Yes.
we understand that. I mean, come to know that is like this is all learned behavior. It's all programmed behavior.
Hmm.
Because as kids, there's no differentiation between who you was gonna play with or not. You just knew I like playing with this kid. I like playing with this particular these kids because I want to have fun, and that's where we've lost, and we've opened our world. We've opened up Pandora's box, and now we have a world full of not only choices, not only struggles, not only issues, but a world full of contradictions. I can create a contradiction off of anything. Like it just it comes to a point of, and I like to use the word a lot because it just gets right back down to it. What's your intention behind it? What's your intention behind creating a counter argument to a point being said, whether in a conversation, a debate, a reasoning?
Hmm.
What is your intention behind it? Are you using that to help dig further so that you can get a better understanding or understanding on the issue so that you can grow from it? Or again, are you using it because that unconscious bias that you have, you're not ready to address that cognitive dissonance, that defeating, that differencing of thoughts in your head, and decide I'm just going to live with that. So to me, it comes down to the
Hmm.
intention because we can do contradictions all day, but addressing it,
Hmm.
and I'll put this out there and continue since we was already talking about that one. Um, Now I want to at least give people some ways of addressing your contradictions. The first step in all of that too, along with also with unconscious bias, is you got to know that you're you're in the midst of a contradiction. So I always say all the keys to me, all the keys to like first steps and stuff is always awareness. Is that you got to know that you're doing some contradictory behavior. If you don't even know that you're doing some type of contradictory behavior, then you don't even know what's going on. And again, we know stuff is going on, so we know when something. Again, the feeling, that sign, that either being comfortable or uncomfortable, lets you know something is not right. Something's going awry. But that's the first step for me is the awareness piece of how to address your contradictions. But I'm gonna let you go ahead, Kuna, because I
Hmm.
see that you got something. So go ahead and I'll jump right back into these steps.
No, keep going.
Okay. Um, the second thing, at least for me, when it comes to addressing your contradictions after you're aware of it, again, I talked about it. The second thing is, all right, knowing, all right, why do I choose that
Mm-hmm.
particular either thought or action? You gotta figure out that why.
Mm-hmm.
After you was like, okay, this is a contradiction. Okay, now why do I end up doing it as a contradiction? I'm gonna put myself on blast because it's only fair that I do so. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
even call it a particular, preference or anything, because for me, it's not that case. But I know we shooting on certain folks, but now folks will know this now. It'll be out there. You can come get me or not. Um, for me, when it comes to dating and it comes to different quote unquote again this construct of race, um, white women for me, it's not a choice. There is no preference. It's none of that. And the reason why it's a contradiction is because supposedly people be saying love is blind and all these other different things is you're supposed to just love people for who they are. For me, it's logical. It's a logical contradiction because yes, I can still end up loving all different races of people. In this particular case, with white women, but that's not what I want because of the case. For me, logically, I know history. I've seen history.
Exactly.
I see what happens. Why would I do
Yeah.
that? As well as the innate already ability. People don't want to talk about it in a large room, but that you are just geared towards what you look like. You look for that. We're tribal. It's okay. Like it's okay to address those things and say that you feel comfortable being around, you say, your own people. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What happens is when it comes and gets out of context and it starts to create again not only these contradictions but create to separate and be like, oh, you're higher or you're lower than
It's
this type
just
of group. That's where
dangerous
it
for
creates
you.
all of
Yeah.
that stuff. It creates that dangerous part. But for me, it's a
Mm-hmm.
contradiction to be like, you know, I can love all types of, races, but when it comes to relationships, white women are not an option for me. Ever. They would never be. And it'd be like, okay, well that's
Oh, is it
why is that a
more like you
contradiction?
can be attracted to all kinds of races and ethnicities because attraction is not a choice, or so they say in
Mm,
science, right? But
mm-hmm.
love is a choice where just because you're attracted to somebody doesn't mean you have to act on it.
Yeah.
Just because your dick is hard doesn't mean you have to fuck everybody, right?
Disclaimer.
Instagram, YouTube.
Yes. Okay. But no, I mean, again, no, again, like you said, I mean, very true. But uh, the way that it can be seen and perceived, this is a contradiction. But again, what's your
Hmm.
intention behind that? My intention behind it is because of the fact that I know the history, as well as for me personally, for me to create a family, I would want to create a family that's in my image because unfortunately for
Hmm.
the black diaspora, as well as just the experience, we have very dysfunctional families and we don't even know how that
Hmm.
looks to be in a functional type of relationship and family.
Hmm.
And for me personally, that
And
would be something
dysfunctional
I
by
would
design
get
too.
into. It is by design. That's going back to the reasonings of why I was like, okay, why did that test say that I was more or somewhat more comfortable being around white people? It's because of the fact that I had to go back unconsciously and figure out, because a lot of this stuff not only stems back from slavery, but it's just even further because there's been an effort. It's already seen. You can look through history. It's been an effort to split up the black family. It's split up all family. Now it's
Hmm.
being done to just split up the nuclear
Going back
family in
all the way to
general.
slavery when they were literally ripping children, babies apart from their mothers, and then shoving white babies to breastfeed, yeah, they were forcing like black women to breastfeed white babies while they were ripping their own babies away from their mothers, right? They did
Yeah.
it by force back then, but today they do it by manipulation and also by
Mm-hmm.
economic manipulation, right? As well as media manipulation, all of these things, since they don't
Yes.
have as much ability to do it by force anymore. But they still do it by force too, because that is why there are so many laws. That's why they had Jim Crow laws, laws against
Yep.
loitering, laws against all of those laws were attacks on. There were the loopholes against the 13th Amendment, right? Because the 13th Amendment
Mm-hmm.
said slavery is abolished except when you're in prison,
Prison.
except
Mm-hmm.
for crime. So they started criminalizing everything black people did,
Mm-hmm.
especially black men, right? Because that was one way to take black when previously they were taking black women apart, right,
Mm-hmm.
from their babies. Now they I think they changed their tactic to taking more black men apart and getting them into prison.
Yeah. Along with reason why
Yeah.
also government assistance. I mean, projects, all of that created.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't have a man in the household. It started that
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. It was again that words are spells. Project. What do you call a
Mm-hmm.
project, or you call a slum in a particular case? It's a project to end up seeing. Okay, how would this be formed, and how we can do different types of experiments on people who live in the projects and see the
Mm-hmm.
outcomes of what happens. Why you want to block? I know for me, I break down the word block like this. When you think of a block, what are you thinking about in particular? You're thinking about uh, a setup of homes all put together. Okay, but what else? When you take away the B, it's lock. It's like, what are you thinking now? You're on the lock because only if you're stuck to this particular block that you only know, it's hard for you to get outside of that to even know further about that. Because at the same time, I put it as my whole analogy is of literally is like your block can also become your own cell because of the fact that not only your home has numbers, and if you don't know your neighbors, anybody outside of that, you come out at certain areas of time and then you come back this areas during the day, night, wherever it is. But you're on a block that can also lock you in because of the fact that you
Mm-hmm.
get so comfortable to a point that you don't want to experience anything outside of. And I'm not saying, of course, you drive outside your block physically, like, of course, but that's why they have such things as, in this particular case, the hood mentality and all of these different mentalities coming out from just being in one area is because you haven't explored to expand. It's very funny how you can do that, even in a physical aspect too of when
Mm-hmm.
we talk about space. If you keep yourself in a limited space, it leaves little to no room to grow. But if you expand your options, you go further out, you begin to be able to be more open and to learn more and be able to grow further because you know there's more than just being on this block. Now, coming back to my point with the whole situation with the breaking up nuclear family and the whole idea with some of that going back to the contradictions and the behaviors is that with my choices too is that the third step with addressing your contradictions is literally being able to critically think and explain when someone
Mm-hmm.
asks you why it's a contradiction. So, like I said, for my example, for me, white women, it's not a preference. It's for dating and for relationship things. It's not even on there. And I gave my reason as to why. I
Mm-hmm.
know the history. I know what my intention of what I will want to do with a family, so I can show how to have a black family that is, of course, functional and able to show the nuclear family and that being able to build that we can create relationships and we can build. That will be my intention of why I
Mm-hmm.
made that particular choice. Again, it
Mm-hmm.
still could be seen as
Yeah,
a
like
contradiction because of that
all
fact.
the she could make a false rape accusation against you. You don't
Yeah,
know. She could get you
it's
killed
it, it's
with
just
one phone call.
again. I'm not
With one
looking.
phone call. Like,
Again, I know that's why I put that whole all those specifics I pull under. I know the history. That's all I have to say
exactly.
personally. But the specifics you can get
Yeah.
into all the different behaviors. Again, we going into the biases and the contradictions and having
Yeah.
to do with the actions and the
I say it because I'm the
behaviors.
same way. Yeah.
But again, there is no like
Yeah.
for me when it comes to yes, the separation of like again, we're talking about race and all of this stuff. I do agree with you, Kunin, when it comes to the whole idea of the human race in that particular case, and it's just a misuse again of words. Honestly, there
Mm-hmm.
is just only one because it's the species. Because if we talking about us being animals, we get into that whole thing, being in the animal kingdom and things and stuff in nature. There's not different races of
Mm-hmm.
birds. There's different species of birds. There's not different races of cats. There's different species of cats. And then some of them are very similar because of the fact that they're under the same family. And we call that a family. We don't call that a different race. We use words so much to a
Yeah,
point that
the
it gets
race
us
is
tongue
made
tied
up.
and we
Yeah,
don't know. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's
We don't
interesting
call it
with
because
that.
it's made up. Like, like
Exactly.
it's hard to see how made up it is because it's so deeply like embedded into the culture. Like, uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to see it in Mexico and India, uh, because over there, in addition to race, they also invented caste.
Yeah.
And in the case of India, they
Mm-hmm.
then blamed it on the Hindus and pretended we invented it, even though they invented it.
Yeah.
Uh, they changed something that we already had, and then they turned it into caste. So when it comes to caste, it's so obvious that it's made up,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because it's so like different from the reg. It's not so embedded into the daily life the way race
Mm-hmm.
is, you know.
Yeah.
And then race is embedded globally, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and I say also in Mexico because I was talking to an indigenous Mexican friend, and we were talking about the invention of cars in India, and she was like, "Oh yeah, they did the same thing in over here in Mexico."
Mm.
And I was telling her that cars comes from the Portuguese word for casta. It's not even our word, and she was like, "Oh, in Spanish it's the same thing because the Spanish colonizers did the same thing as the so Spanish colonizers in Mexico did the same thing as the Portuguese colonizers in India, and then the
Exactly.
British colonizers afterwards, you know. So it is so like ridiculous the whole like. But even though it's made up, just like money is made up, right?
Yep.
But it still has real impact that's devastating
Yeah.
and impressive.
Yep.
So we have to be aware of that too. Like just because
Yes.
something's made up doesn't mean it doesn't impact or affect us. Right?
Exactly. That's why we move and
It
function
still
the way that
does.
we
Yeah.
do. Yeah,
Hmm.
it definitely does. The way that we are programmed, the way that we make our decisions, the way that we end up interacting with people. It all comes down to again all
Yeah.
these systems being put together, which can be created from like we talked about having some of these unconscious biases and these these thoughts without really knowing, and again being taught and learned and then just passed on without any critical thought to be like, okay, dang, will that actually help generations to come to continue to build what we would call the human species? Will we be able to do that? Will this be a
Yeah.
human virus
Oh, there's one thing
that
I want
takes us
to
out?
address too. While I'm still on the top of my head, because sometimes people will try to avoid accountability or hide behind, oh, whenever you bring up racism, they're like, oh, but the white race is completely made up. It doesn't exist. And they try
Mm-hmm.
to hide behind it. I'm like, okay, race itself is made up. So if that's true, then the black race and the brown race also doesn't exist. Do you realize it's all made up? You
Yeah,
know, they don't want to address that. They were like they pretend the black race is still real while they want to hide behind, oh, the white race doesn't exist. I'm like, no, it's all made up, but it has real impact. For all intents and purposes, you know,
yes,
I cannot say to a cop, oh, I'm not brown because it's made up, because to him it's
mm-hmm.
already real, and he's going to treat me accordingly, right? Same
Yeah,
thing with you cannot say, oh, I was white in a past life, which is another thing white people say. It was like, I'm like, I wish I could say that to a cop. I was, because they'll say, oh, I was black in a past life or brown in a past life, but that
yeah,
doesn't mean anything. In this life, you are white and you have real impact as a white person.
yeah. It again, we go back to the contradictions and also the biases is the attention. That
Mm-hmm.
second step, the why. Like why? Like why are you doing that? Why are you deciding to again try to counterpoint a point to what's being said? Are you taking it in to really take it in, or are you just taking it in so that you can sidestep? We don't need you beating around the
Exactly.
bush. We don't need you deflecting. Are you gonna look at it or not? Well, even people also look at it this way too. Well, duh. I mean, not duh for some folks, but it's obvious. Thank you. I appreciate you bringing that out. Okay. But all right, what about when men do this thing? I mean, well, women do that too. I don't care about the what about the other side too? Because for me, and I can say this too. For me personally, I get the holistic. I work in the holistic. So when I make a statement, it's because I'm looking at it from what other people will see it. I'm just showing you. I know there's the other side. Give me a few moments and I'm going to get to the other side. But then, okay, what is your intention about trying to jump to be like, yo, but also it's on women's side too. It's like, okay, I know. We know. Why you want to bring up, when somebody says, only kids do this. Well, you can't say all kids. No, it's not all. It's like we know it's not all. We're giving you this because what happens is if we get too specific, sometimes people get lost. That's why people use general statements at times, which I know generalizations can be detrimental, but people use generalizations because again, if you want to speak about general versus specific in terms of literally we'll say just food. I guess I'm hungry. I don't know. But literally, generalizations is more of the fast food, and the specifics is more of we'll just say in lack of better words is the gourmet food. It's the well cooked meal. And the reason why is because it takes more
Mm-hmm.
time to get more specific versus in general, you can throw out generalities just quick like that. And what it does, it shocks and galvanizes people and be like, yo, but wait, no, what about? And then the thing is, it opens up if you are willing and ready to then go into the specifics. So you start
Mm-hmm.
with the general, so then you can move into the specifics. But again, your intention behind you addressing that is how well it will go over and how it will roll out. But again, some people do it so fast because they like the fast food way, the generalization, versus being like, we gonna
Mm-hmm.
slow cook this, we gonna take our time, throw the spices, do all of that so it can come out is a great conversation, great reasoning, and people can leave from it full. Not just leave from it full and just kind of like this is kind of had a bad taste in my mouth. No, full, but also grateful for the meal. Food for thought. Boom. What y'all think? I was gonna put that all back in there together. That's why we have a phrasing that called food for thought. And it's depending on how
Mm-hmm.
you prepare it and you do that. That's how I would say this another way. Again, another step of how to address your contradictions is also
Mm-hmm.
the way that you present all of that together.
Mm-hmm. I
So
think
you go from the addressing. But go ahead.
another way to address your contradictions is to expand your knowledge, just your general knowledge about things in general, but also about systemic oppression and systemic biases in particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, if you have only one perspective, you don't see all the pieces. At first, something might not seem like a contradiction, but if you
Yeah.
look deeper or take a more expanded point of view, it might be a contradiction. I have a story to share about that where, uh, so we all know about the biases like racism, sexism, ableism, classism, right? A lot of people are aware of that. But
Mm-hmm.
there's one more bias that's like almost like the last frontier where people are resistant to looking at because it's deeply related to also our dating preferences, right?
Yeah.
So recently, in an in a dating group about no, it's not a dating group, but it's a Facebook group about dating, right?
Yeah.
And occasionally people will post. a dating profile on behalf of somebody else as a friend. So this guy posted uh, a dating profile on behalf of his friend, who's a woman, right? So this
Yeah.
woman friend of his, and he was like, "Oh, this is the about section of the woman. She cares about social justice, and then this is what this woman's looking for." And there were so many guys and so many people who were making fun of her because, oh, this person cares for social justice, but wants a guy who is 5'11", which was her preference, a high preference, right? So they
Mm-hmm.
were like, oh, no social justice for the short guys, like, and then so people were like infighting or fighting, right? They were
Yeah.
like, some people were like, how is it a contradiction? That's her own dating preference, right?
Yeah.
But I was looking at that, I was like, okay, there is a specific kind of bias
Yeah.
that's very little talked about. It's called lookism.
Yeah.
And there might even be cultural differences, but lookism, at least in the United States, there is a preference for height and facial symmetry. And not
Thank you,
just
Disney.
romantically, but even, yeah, but even like not just romantically, but even like work wise or corporate wise, like people who
Yep.
are good looking who are more likely to get a promotion because they're automatically seen as smarter and good people. Going back to that good evil false line, they're seen as good or even kind just because they're good looking, right? That's the bias. They've even done an experiment in airports where they pretended that somebody forgot or left a college application,
Yeah.
right? And there was a picture of the person with the application.
Yeah.
So very disproportionately, a lot more people mailed in, the people with the good looking picture and not the bad looking picture.
Yeah.
So again, the bias of lookism is right there. So, but you wouldn't know that if you didn't study these social justice issues, that deeply, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know about it until I read a science fiction novel, a novella by
Yeah.
Kat Chan called "Liking What You See," a documentary. Uh, and in the afterword, that's when he talked about the experiment, the airport experiment, and after the novel or the
Yes.
novella. But the premise of the novella was, what if you were able to biologically switch the ability to see that someone is good looking? How would
Hmm.
dating change? And so that was the premise of the science fiction novel, and it's very fascinating to read it.
Hmm.
Like it completely changed my perspective on this thing.
Reading is power, y'all.
And yeah, readers make leaders, right?
Mm.
But you would not know that if you. And I had to read an obscure science fiction. I mean, he's kind of famous, but not that famous, right? Like,
Yes.
so I had to read that to know that. And most people
Yes.
don't. Most people don't read that much.
And it's because it's again it's not, and I'll use a big, not a big word, but I'll use a word that might be taken out of context, but it's not glorified. It's not celebrated to
Exactly.
to do so. So
Mm-hmm.
also that's
Mm-hmm.
a contradiction in itself too. Honestly, we talked about it earlier, but things that are supposed to be good for you, it's not necessarily the best, the most great looking option. But what's bad for
Mm-hmm.
you, we know is not the best option, but it looks so good to us. That's a contradiction there in
Mm-hmm.
itself too. You know to do right, but then doing wrong looks so much better than doing right that you decide to go do wrong, and then you get mad, frustrated, and put yourself in a state of like,
Mm-hmm.
dang, it was all its fault. Like, no accountability, and that was a contradiction in the first place because you already knew what was supposed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to go ahead and get to wrapping up. So, Kunin, if you have any last
Mm-hmm.
points on addressing your contradictions, or another step if you wanted to add, or a whole overall summary of everything together.
Yeah, I would say like keep expanding your perspective. Like keep uh, going back to the whole like echo chamber is not a term that I always like because sometimes it's used very derisively to oppress people,
Yeah.
especially by the alt right. But that's why I prefer the term resonant chamber for those cases. But that does come a point where sometimes you do stay in a bubble, and so it's good to expand that bubble
Hmm.
and learn new things. Like one of the things that I tried to do, for example, is to get out of the bubble of being colonized by white supremacy programming was I started initially with TED Talks where I would type into YouTube TED Talks Kenya, TED Talks India, even TED Talks Myanmar, my own country,
Yes.
uh, because I was ignoring the brilliance of even my own country people, my own countrymen and women,
Yeah.
uh, and and then TED Talks Sierra Leone, TED Talks Mexico, that's one way.
Yes.
Another is to start reading more books by people, not just black and brown people who grew up in the United States, but actually people from other countries who grew up in other countries. There is a difference because the non-American privilege creates its own bubble.
Yes.
I call it, it's not just me, it's a term other people created. It's also known as onto epistemological privilege, which is also onto epistemological bubble, where the the worldview of North America is seen as superior and the center of the world,
Mm.
right? When in reality they're only 5% of the population. That's why you gotta read books by people who actually grew up in other countries, not just people who, look different but grew up here. So that's important too.
Yeah.
So like really truly genuinely expand your perspective, not just pay lip service to it.
Awesome. Appreciate that because that is definitely an important point to put there too. Is just because you may look the part doesn't mean that you stand the part. That you've actually went through it. Is you would you rather
Mm-hmm.
get a perspective from a professional diver that's actually went to the
Mm-hmm.
bottoms of the seas and has traveled and figured out where coral reefs and where you can find specific aquatic life? Or do you want to talk about, or would you want to get perspective from someone who's an enthusiast about being a diver and knows all the different spots, but hasn't had that experience to be able to tell you specifically what it means to be
Mm-hmm.
an expert diver? Again, you gotta
Mm-hmm.
make sure. I do agree with the expanding your perspective on those stuff. Um, was there anything else?
Mm-hmm.
Are you good?
Yeah, that's the main thing because also want to point out one of the reasons for it is uh, not only does it benefit you in terms of expanding your perspective, uh, it benefits the people that you buy the books from, etc. Because in the United States, there are stats that show that publishing is, I think it's still 99% white, or at least 79% white. Is there
Hmm.
stats? It's still, I think it's actually 99% cis and 79% white. I'll have to check, but
Hmm.
it's like huge. There's still like a huge bias towards that. So not only does it benefit you, you're gonna benefit the people from those countries as well when you do so.
It's all great to have. We gotta have multiple perspectives to
Yeah,
be able multiple things to have multifaceted solutions. Um, but with that,
yeah.
y'all, to wrap up,
Also because it's so important not to overlay your US centric worldview onto other countries because it might be the exact opposite. A good example is the political left and right in the United States. Uh, what what is left in the United States might be the complete opposite in another country. Like for example, my understanding I of Indian politics is that it's almost like the complete opposite in India, where the left is pro-colonial and then the right is anti-colonial in India.
hmm,
That's what's happening over there. So it's basically like the opposite. over here, where the the right is anti is pro-fascist and then the left is anti-fascist, right? So, but I've noticed the left will try to overlay their politics and demonize the anti-colonial right in India
Mm.
because they're taking advantage of the manipulating the our ignorance because we don't know that it's different. So it's important. That's another reason why it's important to really expand your perspectives. Because going back to the contradictions, right? It seems like a contradiction, but it's actually more like opposites where they will. Actually, it is a contradiction where the politics over there completely contradict, the politics over here. And I believe it might be
Actions and
similar in
behaviors.
some South American, yeah, similar in some South American countries as well, where you might see that uh, over there, the people who are supposedly conservative tend to be more indigenous people. In the people
Hmm.
that who are more liberal, they tend to be pro globalization, pro westernization, things like that.
And with that, y'all, to wrap up, appreciate you as always, Kunden. Appreciate everyone came through as well as shared, even stopped by. So shouts out to y'all. Appreciate y'all's time. It's always important that we have this time together and that you come and you share it with me because you don't even have to, but I'm grateful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to wrap up, first thing, always remember when it comes to current events, please make sure you inform yourself. I think this whole episode, that's mostly what we really talked about, is really just widening your perspective and really
Mm-hmm.
being well informed. Because once you are well informed, you're able to come up again with plans, with ways to not only protect yourself, but also protect those around you and be able to move accordingly. So please stay aware of what's going on in the world, not only just in the U.S., not only in your hometown, but also worldwide. We all affect each other. Come on, we live together.
Mm-hmm.
Second, when it comes to unconscious bias, yes, there's pros and cons to it. I always want to make sure is again we can talk about the not just the duality, but the wholeness of each each word, each thing, because it can be broken down so specifically to the point we lose the general point of what it does. So main thing with unconscious bias is making sure that if you're not aware of it, when you become aware of it, be ready to take it on, because ultimately the last thing, it'll help towards you being able to address your contradictions. And how do you address your contradictions, whatever those may be? First, you got to definitely start off with having the awareness. You got to know if there's a contradiction that's there. You got to be able to want to do that. Second, you got to know why is a contradiction to yourself. Why do you end up even continuing to do whatever that end up being? The third thing, which I definitely agree with Kuhn, and this is then if that's the case, you know why. Now expand your knowledge around, okay, why the fact, what is the contradiction really about? What is the basics and the general consensus about what this thing is? And then the fourth thing is being able to relay that to someone when you're having a conversation. So that ultimately the fifth thing is that you put yourself firm in knowing your decision and your take and how you feel about it at the end of the day. So confronting the either comfortable or the uncomfortable feelings that you get from it. So ultimately, there's more, but with those 5 steps, there's a way for you to address your contradictions. Again, the key is also having that intention to want to do so in the first place. But
Mm-hmm.
with that, y'all, again, appreciate y'all time. Much love. I'm grateful again for everyone that's there. Shouts out to those that who were here that watched, as well as those who gonna be watching this later on Instagram or YouTube. Just know on YouTube, please subscribe to your boy at A.D.V.I.S. Speaks. Don't forget to like, comment, share, as well as hit the notification bell because there's more videos that come out, as well as more things like this that you may want to see, you may not want to see again. But at the same time, subscribe to your boy. There's much more to come. Um, and other than that, y'all, thank you again, Kunden. I've been your brother A.D.V.I.S. This has been another episode of What's the Word Wednesdays. We do this every Wednesday. Check back in with us. We'll have more for you next time. But with that, y'all, please know that you're valuable, know that you're loved, and know that take that time to look it up and to learn more and expand your horizons. But other than that, y'all, peace and one love. We'll see y'all next Wednesday. We are out.